Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Destination Big Leagues. In today's episode, I've got Ashish Bhatia. Ashish Bhatia is the principal product manager at Microsoft, and he's been with them for the past 10 years. Thank you so much for coming onto the platform, Ashish. Uh, could you quickly run through a quick introduction? I know you've got an illustrious career. Could you let us know like your journey to becoming a principal product manager at Microsoft?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Ronak, for inviting me to the podcast. You mentioned that I've spent 10 years with Microsoft. In my current role, I'm working on AI Builder. It's a no-code AI tool in Power Platform, and I'm product manager for that. I'm looking at generative AI capabilities there. Prior to taking this role, I've worked in various other teams as, again, a product manager, mostly all AI kind of products and AI-focused teams. So it's been an interesting journey, especially in the last year. It has been super hectic and it has just blown out of proportions. Before joining Microsoft, I've spent about 8 years at Nokia as a product manager as well, and mostly focused on mobile application development, core capabilities in mobile phone. I was also managing the Nokia identity kind of there. So when you log into Nokia phones, you use, for example, Nokia account to log in. So again, just the identity management solution was run by our team.
Right. So, yeah, generative AI has boomed in the last year. Microsoft has definitely played a key role in kind of being part of that generative AI revolution. So, can you run through kind of what is AI Builder and, how does Power Automate work along with AI Builder?
So AI Builder are promises to democratize. It feels cliche right now that everybody wants to democratize AI, but again, that has been our goal since kind of several years. We launched this capability back in 2017, and since then, that has been our goal. AI Builder is, you should think of it as a no-code AI tool in Power Platform. So not just Power Automate, but all of Power Platform, which includes Power Apps and now Copilot Studio as well. It is a foundational layer in the platform. So just like Dataverse, which is a foundational data layer, AI Builder is a foundational AI layer in the platform. So you can build automation, Power Automate with AI. You can build intelligent applications and Power Apps with AI Builder. And just this year, we launched GPT-based capabilities inside that. So you essentially can just prompt the model and get a task done, right from summarization to extraction, to then finding sentiments of things or replying to your customers and things like that. So can the goal is bring the power of generative AI to citizen makers, people who can't write code but have ideas and dream of doing stuff and solving problem. So just enable them as much as possible. That's the goal.
Right. So basically, you don't necessarily have to code to use these low-code, no-code solutions.
Not at all.
Which is pretty incredible, right? Because it is awesome that with sort of with generative AI. I mean, especially if you're like getting into like prompt engineering and stuff, you don't necessarily need to kind of have hard coding skills. You can kind of pull things away and with some clever prompt engineering, really build some pretty cool and interesting apps. Uh, what are the use cases that you've been seeing people kind of using Power Automate and AI Builder, like in terms of the clients and stuff? Like, what have you been seeing some interesting use cases?
A lot of our scenarios that we see, especially in the automation context, are around document intelligence, document processing, right? Where people have either emails coming in or documents coming in. Imagine some kind of an invoice processing system, right? That you're working with a ton of vendors, or your company works with a ton of vendors, and you get invoices all the time, and you want a system to be able to parse it and then store that data as structured data, right? So conversion of unstructured data to structured data. So things like that. Email processing ends up being a very common scenario where if you're in, let's say, retail business or any other business, you get a ton of customer emails, right? Those could be orders or returns or kind of queries about the product, and you want to route those emails in different directions, or just classify them and send them to different automation systems, right? And for certain things you want to automatically process, certain things you want humans to process. So again, routing of email is a very common scenario that we see.
Right. So, a lot of people are like super excited about Copilot. What do you think about Copilot? Like how have you seen people kind of use Copilot? How do you use Copilot in your day to day?
Yeah. So again, I think the excitement comes from, I mean, experiences that people had with ChatGPT, right? That you can ask it to do a task for you, right? I mean, you have to provide a lot of data context to it for it to respond to your situation, your scenario well. But the emergent capabilities of generative AI models and ChatGPT specifically created a lot of excitement that people wanted to do similar stuff, but in their business context, right? So that's where co-pilots come in. That the goal is you have same fundamental generative AI capabilities or AI capabilities, um, actually probably the same similar models, right? But you want to bring it into your own business context. You want it to rely on your data. You also want it to be deeply integrated into your workflow, right? That's where Copilot comes in. That the idea is it's part of your workflow, it's part of your business process. It's an assistant that's available that can understand, access your data, can respond to your data, and work with your data. Thus, generate output that is more aligned with problems that you're trying to solve. With ChatGPT, you always take your data, go to ChatGPT, get something done, and bring the result back. The idea is you should have an assistant right in the process, in the workflow, in the application that you're using.
Right. Like, have you seen some organizations out there like use Copilot quite impressively?
Oh yeah, I mean we have some early adopters who have been using Copilot for a while. We recently at Ignite, Microsoft Ignite, which is the annual conference, announced Copilot Studio, where it gives you the capability to extend the Copilot. So Copilot, of course, is built by Microsoft, but people have been asking, or customers have been asking, can we extend it with more capability? So think of it as any intelligent assistant that you might have used on phone. It can do things that it can do, and you can't change it much, right? The idea here is that Copilot is again a baseline Copilot that you get as part of your application, but there is possibility to extend it. And Copilot Studio, what it does is it lets you create these extension points, right? It lets you create plugins, um, which will add new skills to the Copilot. So if you figure out that Copilot can't answer a thing or can perform a task for you, you can go create a plugin of your own, custom plugin, again with minimalistic code, and be able to extend this capability. So you can keep building a custom Copilot in that sense.
Right. So, what are some of like Microsoft's native AI, like generative AI products that, recently came out and it's currently part of your workflow and you can't imagine a world where you used to live without it?
So a lot of Copilot we're starting to see in Microsoft a suite of applications, Word, PowerPoint, and things like that. I recently saw a little Copilot icon or co-creator icon in Paint as well, right? So a lot of these things that we've used for years, they're getting transformed. Or they're getting um, an assistant of some sort, right? That will help you do stuff like a lot of times when I'm writing, I use Copilot as a writing assistant, right? Hey, here I have a draft. Help me think through a blind spot, things that I've not thought through, right? Or help me rewrite this statement in a different way. So things like that. I mean, it is changing fundamentally how we build stuff. Some of the AI we already had, and we didn't realize it was AI. Like if you go back to time and look at PowerPoint, the PowerPoint designer, right? When you're creating a slide and certainly a suggestion pops up on the right, on you can reformat your slide differently. That has changed the game for me, right? In terms of making my slides look aesthetically right or more polished, right? So gone are those days of like very boring slides. Design. I can't imagine my life without designer, let's say in PowerPoint. So that is just a great example of AI embedded in your workflow and making your job better.
Right. I think a lot of consultants would thank you, because they spend hours and hours just making sure the formatting is right. So taking the most dreadful parts of your job away, so you can kind of spend time doing the more meaningful stuff, is game changing.
Yeah.
So you're a product manager, right? You see all these tools coming in. It's clear that worker productivity is going to increase. So how do you recalibrate your expectations now, from an employee? Like, if an employee was traditionally pre generative AI X level of productivity, like, how have you been expecting more, or how does that change?
So that's a great question, right? I mean, it always starts with myself, right? I'm trying to figure out how can I leverage these tools to do my job better, right? In my role, I do a lot of writing as a product manager. When you're putting down your thoughts on what's working, what's not working, what are my customers asking for, looking at the data and trying to understand, right? What are friction areas in the product. I'm seeing my own productivity gain in terms of writing, in terms of data analytics, right? How these tools are helping me get to outcomes, decisions faster, being able to create new ideas, generate new ideas at times. Like, I mean, it's a good ideation tool, right? If you write down, here are my thoughts, help me think through what is, like, you can bounce back ideas with somebody, right? In that sense, you can somehow sometimes tackle your biases as well, right? That, hey, I'm thinking that this is high priority. Let's reason, right? And then let's walk through pros and cons of things. So in my own productivity, I've seen massive uptick. In, again, if some of these tools were not available, I wouldn't be as productive, I feel. Um, I feel that that's the underlining goal for a lot of this AI, right? That it should create massive productivity gain for everybody, and you should be able to have time to do more creative stuff, more of stuff that adds value to your customers. Um, that I mean, in my opinion, that's the direction we are headed in.
Right.
And again, everybody or folks will have to figure out, like, what works for them, what doesn't works for them, like what's relevant for their scenario. But AI tools should absolutely, I mean, the difference going forward, I feel, would be folks who can use these AI tools to create advantage for themselves versus folks who don't understand, right? I mean, that will be a differentiating factor. It's a new skill that everybody should have.
Exactly. So, let's just kind of move back to kind of just building AI products, right? Like, if you're a company, or you just sort of, you want to make tools for yourself, like, uh, like, there's so many LLMs out there. GPT is the most famous one, but there's
Mm-hmm.
Claude, there's Bard. Microsoft also has got their own, I think it's called Phi or something like that. So there's
Mm-hmm.
quite a lot of LLMs out there, right? Uh, how does one pick what LLM they should use for their product or service?
Yeah. So that's a fundamentally a great question. I feel a lot of people struggle with that, in the sense there's a mad rush right now to use the most powerful thing out there, um, which might not be the right strategy. In some scenarios, yes, you need the most powerful thing to go after and solve the scenario. But beyond the excitement, beyond the hype, at some point of time, you got to rationalize the cost behind the capability that you're building, right? Um, Using the most powerful model obviously adds cost and latency, right? So you have to think through, right? What am I building? Is it bringing the value back, right, from a cost perspective? Second, are the latencies that I'm getting or offering, are those kind of detrimental to my product or whatever you're building? So those are two at least things. Also, a generalized model has a lot of noise as well in it, right? It has emergent capabilities for sure, but it has also a lot of noise in it. So you'll have to think through, right? Is that something that is an advantage or disadvantage for me? I feel some of the smaller models which are emerging are pretty good. They offer just a new perspective to stuff, right? It's smaller, it has a smaller footprint, the throughput, the costing would be so much different from largest of the models. Also, they're using different strategies to train those models. So if you look at Phi 2 that was recently announced or came out, a lot of that is trained on synthetic data, right? Data which is not coming from internet. I mean, internet data is great, but you see a lot of you see a lot of bias, you see a lot of negativity in that data, right? But if a model is fundamentally trained on synthetic data, which is already sensitized in some sense, then you don't see that bias, that negativity, misinformation, or whatnot in the training data, right? So you're already building a model which is smaller, easier to control, easier to steer. And from a business perspective, you're building some business application, it might be a better model to start with, right? So you really have to, if and when people are building these capabilities, you have to think through what are you building, what's your scenario, what's the value you're creating, what models work better for you, and then test through some of these different variations and figure out things for yourself. Cost is going to be a factor. Ability to hallucinate, that is going to be a factor. How creative is the model is going to be a factor. How well aligned is the model to your scenario, to your use case, that's going to be a factor. And then of course latency of service is going to be another factor. So.
Right. So like hallucinations are a huge problem, right? Like a lot of people, especially like businesses, right? And if it's sort of a customer service facing chatbot or an AI solution, you don't want your model to kind of spew out something that's factually incorrect, right? What have you seen, from sort of what are the best use cases to kind of ground hallucinations to a minimum?
So Andre Karpathy recently sent out a tweet, I think. I don't know if you've
I
seen
saw
that.
that.
Yeah.
Actually, we made a show, well, run this like new show that we've called like AI Weekly, but he's basically like hallucinations basically don't exist, and it was a pretty interesting tweet, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the message he is conveying is hallucination is feature, not a bug.
Right.
And what he means by that is the idea of a super intelligent system is to be creative. Right? I mean, sure, we're not at super intelligence or HAI as well, but the idea these models are got to be creative. They're not creative if they are next word generation tool. They will never possess emergent capabilities or super intelligence capabilities. The I mean, even if you look at humans, I mean, somebody is smarter than you. They have more creative ideas. They're doing things that you're not doing, right? So they are thinking differently, right? And unless these models are able to perform some of that, or not some of that, but unless these models are creative, you will not find the next drug for something or the next way to solve a math problem, right? I mean, you will always they will be repeating what humans have done in past, right? So they're kind of repetitive in that nature, and they're um, regurgitating what humans have done in past, right? The path to super intelligence is not that. The path to super intelligence is emergent capabilities, emergent behavior, novel findings, right? And the way you get that is, again, model has to be creative. I'm not saying model has to hallucinate, but model has to be creative, right? And hallucination is a side effect of it. So that's why I think he mentioned that hallucination is a feature, not a bug. The way we tackle hallucination, though, is by grounding, right? Making sure that model has business data or enough context, right, to be able to generate the right aligned content. Let's say, I always say hallucination. I mean, the model is like a happy puppy, right? It's trying to please you. It's trying to complete your job, whatever you ask it. It wants to perform. It wants to make you happy. It wants to get you where you want to be, right? And it's in its desire to do that. If it doesn't find the right context, it brings whatever is around that vector space to fulfill that task, right? The more context we give, the more business data we bring to it, the better we are able to control the model to be aligned with the goals, right? And I feel that's the path to solve the hallucination problem. Of course, there's a ton of research going on how to make models be self-critical, right? Before they send out something, can they self-check themselves that, hey, if this was the question asked, and if I am answering this, is it aligned, not aligned, right? How do I validate if I answer the question, right? So there's a lot of self-checking, critical thinking being brought in. But again, citations, asking the model to cite something, asking the model to make sure the content is coming out of the citation. Those are some of the techniques that people can already use to kind of cut down on hallucination, I feel.
Right. So probably more effective prompt engineering, and then making sure your data is solid and robust. So right. So yeah, I think those are good points for hallucinations. But yeah, I think the Andre Scarpati tweet was quite interesting because I mean, in terms of like creativity, like the nature of creativity is being stochastic, right? Like the most creative people are the most unpredictable ones, and they don't come from like the general neural patterns, right? It's these weird patterns which no one can kind of integrate. And then the best part about GPT is like it can, or these LLMs is it can take this large data and wide data and like basically find this pattern that through human capability or cognitive capability you're not going to recognize. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like his perspective, like it's a feature, not a bug. It was definitely
Yeah, I
super
mean,
interesting to read.
if you look at even example of AlphaGo, right? I think there are several instances that have been quoted that AlphaGo played moves that a human would not have because it felt like that's not the right path, right, and not lead you to success. But it was able to think out of box, led it to again perform, play better, and things like that. There is another video about how AlphaGo was developed, how emergent capabilities in game playing were figured out, and it's just super interesting to understand because the way we have been doing things, that will take you to a path which is kind of predictable, like you know with this existing knowledge I can probably land here. Unless you try a different path, you would not know where you would go, right? I mean, so that's what these models are doing in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like yeah, classical chemistry, right? You have the classical atomic model, and then you know the sort of quantum physics comes in, and then you have like we just realized like it was a you have your electrons and proton neutron in a two-dimensional way, but then we learned that it's waves and particles. Like you have to have someone coming with a completely new perspective to unravel new knowledge. Yeah,
Okay.
but so okay. So Microsoft has been like they published this GitHub in this paper recently. It was called AutoGen. I don't know if you've
Okay.
heard of it.
Yeah.
AI agents is huge, right? A lot of people in the AI communities and stuff like that are like super hyped about the potential of AI. And AutoGen's super interesting. Like it can basically kind of restructure an organization where you have multiple agents, multiple roles. You can have a manager as well in the middle, kind of it, and then you have a human in the loop. What do you think about AI agents? Like,
So interesting, right? I mean, somebody had posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago predictions for 2024, and somebody was saying RAG next year is the year of RAG, right? Which is retrieval augmented generation. I posted on how I was like, I feel next year is the year of autonomous agents. So again, I'm super bullish on what capabilities like AutoGen can do for us, and I feel next year we'll see a lot of emergent behavior around autonomous agents. The whole idea of AutoGen or again frameworks like that is to create self-contained task executing independent agents which can communicate together and get a task accomplished. So if you say right now, I think a lot of people use this example. You go to ChatGPT, you say, hey, I am trying to get a reservation or help me kind of plan a vacation, right? And I'm going from point A to point B and I'm going to stay there X number of days, right? You still, even though ChatGPT is getting stuff done for you using plugins under the hood, there's still a lot of back and forth between you and ChatGPT to get task done. Think of a scenario where autonomous agents come in and they can figure out stuff, right? So you set the goals for them, you set the boundaries, you set the constraints for them, right? In this scenario, that would be point A to point B, dates, things you want to do, budget, and how many people are traveling. So you get them conditions, constraints, and things like that, and then you let the agents figure that things out, right? Which flights to book, which hotels to book, what other things to manage. And they're doing that in unison by communicating with each other, by passing messages to each other, exchanging information and stuff like that, and thus accomplishing a task. The pattern that exists today is, even if you look at Copilot or ChatGPT or any intelligent conversational agent, human messages, the assistant will take stock of that, do something, come back asking for more question or feedback and whatnot. And there is back and forth communication happening between a human and an assistant. And I think the path that Autogen or some of these frameworks are taking is some of this could also be offloaded, and agents can work together to solve some of that. I think the biggest challenge is how are we going to maintain human oversight over that, right? Because you don't want runaway agents solving world problem or creating more problem in the world, right? So human agency is going to be the critical piece there, or the challenging piece there. How do we maintain human oversight over things? Autogen framework, for example, has human proxy agents. So again, there is a ton of human control built into it right from get-go. So again, those are kind of the areas that we'll have to definitely focus on.
Right. So, while talking about agents, you kind of mentioned about RAGs. So, a lot of I've heard a lot of discussion debates about when do you use a RAG and when you have to fine tune a model. Like,
Mhm.
can you set that up? Like,
Some of it is changing as well, right? I had this mental model myself, and I always like to second guess myself. But again, the mental model that I had was, if you want to teach the AI model a new task to do, right, then go fine tune it. If you're giving it a new knowledge source, then RAG works well, right? What I mean by that is, let's say the model has, I'm thinking of a scenario. Let's say it does well with, let's say, hospitality industry, right? And you're from some other industry, retail, right? We've seen it work well in the hospitality because, again, it's maybe trained on that data, or works well in that data, or has that as a grounding data. But you want to you want to use a similar concept, but let's say for retail. What you really need is, you want to bring in your own data as knowledge, right? And have the model align with that, right? And a good example is, let's say you are trying your retail entity, you want to respond to your customers who are complaining about product, who are writing reviews of products and things like that, and you want to effectively and spontaneously kind of go, or in time, go back to them and kind of address their issues. A RAG pattern would be, for an incoming complaint, I want to look at my historical data for when I have dealt in past with these kind of complaints, right? Help me pull out references from my historical data, and then also pull out how I responded to them, and use that to create a novel response for this unique incoming request, right? So let's say I manufacture solar lights, right? And somebody's pissed off about my solar lights because they don't work, right? And they've raised the complaint about it. So I can go back, look at in my data of when something like this has happened and what was my response, and looking at the uniqueness of this and how I responded and what that response looks like. I can ask the model to use it as a reference, use it as an example to create a net new response to this customer, let's say. Now that is an idea which is borrowed from hospitality, where maybe hospitality, they deal with customer requests, customer complaints all the time, and so you're not teaching model anything new, you're giving it a new knowledge source, right? But let's say you are to build a new capability altogether. You are trying to figure out, GitHub Copilot is a good example, right? You want model to be able to write code, right? which is similar to text, but it's code versus natural language, right? So that scenario, you're training the model to be able to generate code, which is different from responding in text, right? So that's when you would fine tune a model versus use a RAG pattern, I would say. So anytime you're doing a new task, think of maybe fine tuning. I would always say start with RAG. If that doesn't work, then think about fine tuning.
Makes a lot of sense. So basically, new skill, new task that might not be within the general domain stuff, then probably fine tune. But yeah, I mean, I think starting with RAG, and then if that doesn't perform to your expectation, then kind of going ahead and doing fine tuning.
RAG is also easier to implement,
Right.
cheaper to maintain in that sense. Your knowledge source can independently keep growing from the model advancements. So you can always easily migrate to the latest version of GPT. So your model is still most potent model, and your knowledge sources independently expanding as you're responding to new queries. You keep adding them to your repository, so knowledge and model can independently grow. When you are fine tuning, right, you are locking the model in time, right? So you're taking a version of the model as your baseline, you're taking a snapshot of the data and training it, and that stays frozen in time until you come back and retrain that model, right? So you're always frozen in time, locked in time. For some scenarios, that might work still well, right? Because you're getting a much more aligned model to your goal versus what you would get with RAG. But again, those are some of the things that you'll have to think through when you're building these capabilities.
Right. So, now that we figured out how do RAGs and how fine tuning works in terms of preferences of what to use when and where. Uh, let's say a company is kind of like A/B testing between RAG or like fine tuning to see which one's better, like metrics. How are you testing? How are you evaluating? What metrics are you sort of using to kind of test and compare, two different LLMs? I guess two different type of sort of models like RAG and fine tuning as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Metrics is super important. The definition of metrics is a little bit evolving in the large language world, right? There can be a ton of annotation that you can bring along as well, right? I mean, the simple way of how we used to do this in traditional ML world was you have a data set, it's a labeled data set, you'll break it into train and test, right? So train is what you give the model. Again, it has labels, so you know the source truth, right, or ground truth, and you give it to the model and say, hey, learn everything that you can about it. And then you have rest of the data set that you had split out as test, and again, it's labeled, so you can compare the model generated labels versus human labels, and you can kind of make a decision how well the model is performing. You could still do a lot of that, right? If you have a labeled data set, you go, I mean, an example would be, let's say, sentiment analysis, right? If you're doing sentiment analysis of some sort using generative AI, you probably have a labeled data set of positive, negative, neutral, so it's easy to go use that annotation and say, hey, whether RAG is working well or fine-tune is working well. But when you have more creative tasks, right, where model is generating net new content or is creating text versus a few fields, like in case of sentiment, it would be the sentiment, or if it's an extraction, you will know what you wanted to extract. But if it's more creative, it's creating some kind of a response to an email, for example, right? That is a natural language text, right? How do you then make a sense of, is this generation better than that, or are they similar, and things like that, right? So that's when you have to think through on is it capturing certain, so we call it I mean, it's kind of annotation as well, but it's annotation in the sense you want to capture the essence of what this generation should have. So for example, you have a sample email coming in, and if a human were to respond, what would that ideal reply look like? What are some of the elements of that reply? So you capture some of those, and in your metrics, you want to make sure that the model generated responses touches upon those things, right? And that's how you kind of then evaluate between two models, right? Is it kind of capturing all those? What percentage of those annotations is it capturing or not capturing? So that's what we use to figure out between two models, or A/B test between two models.
Right. So, just so you said 2024 is basically the year of AI agents, right? It's just super fascinating because the implications of AI agents is unfathomable, right? Like, there's a lot of things AI agents can do that we probably can't even predict, right? Uh, how do you see, like, let's say AI agents, manifest the way that we think it will, like how do you see like these agents kind of disrupting, I guess, society in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When we think about agents, we think about these runaway AI models, maybe even embodied robots going and destroying the world. Um, I feel we'll start very differently. I mean, when I think about agents, I think about what is the task, what is the scope, what are the constraints that I'm defining, and making sure that the agents uh, play within that, right? The goal is to be able to solve tasks either autonomously or with human feedback, right? Whenever we go to the autonomous realm, that is where you have to have a sense of, right, hey, how do I make sure that this will be scoped, or this task or this autonomous execution will be scoped within the goals that I define and can't go beyond that, right? Um, that is how I feel we'll start off making sense of this, driving value from this, because eyes off automation is, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to go there. Like that, you set off an AI agent and they will go solve the problem. You have zero control over it. Your task is done. Right? That's not the future I think we're running after. It'll profoundly change our the way we work, the productivity that we derive. But there are so many unanswered questions that we need to still figure out on how we'll solve some of that. It's an emerging space, I feel. So there's a lot to be done. Human oversight should be kept as the primary goal in all these endeavors. That's how we kind of tackle this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sometimes it's interesting to kind of just think about, right? Like let's say like AGI is attained, right? Like would AGI, like when AGI is attained, like would it be something like, hey, we know we've crossed the threshold of AGI, or would it be something that naturally seeps in, that incrementally seeps in, and we might already be living in an AGI age. ChatGPT might well be like, like AGI, but maybe it's smarter than us. It knows how to pretend to be, dumb. Like it's like how does AGI happen? Like does some research lab in Microsoft one day come like, hey, Eureka, we've hit it, we've got AGI. How do you think AGI happens?
I mean, I think most of the researchers have consensus that this will be gradual and not a moment in time. Um, the way I think about it is, I mean, if you have a child, if you've interacted with a child and you've seen them grow, right, from toddler to kind of a 10-year-old versus a teenager, you'll see their um, the knowledge, the expanse of knowledge that they have exponentially changes over time. And at some point of time, you're like, wow, like I talk to my son all the time, and sometimes like when we're having conversation, like, how did you know about that, right? Or I had no clue that you were thinking about this, or this is a topic that is of your interest, right? Um, and I feel some of AGI will be like that. It will gradually grow into this entity which has super intelligence, or understands more than, again, an individual human can kind of hold, or the amount of knowledge that they can hold together. Um, but I feel before we go there, we need alignment to be figured out, because how do you control, guardrail, align, manage something which is smarter than you,
Exactly,
right?
right. And I think you gave a good example of, like having a child. right? You see your kid just growing and emerging and really like acquiring skill sets and new knowledge that you couldn't even fathom about, right? But the thing about it is, at one point, your son's going to be 18, he's going to university, he's probably going to be 5x smarter than you. At that time, like, how do those guardrails work? You know, he's going to leave the house when he wants to, he's going to make his decisions himself. So, how do you think that these guardrails would play a
So I
part?
feel it's exactly, yeah, it's exactly the same as how our parents saw us grow, right? I mean, when you are parenting a child, right? You want to make sure. I hope that is how most of the people do it, but you want to make sure that you aligning them with good values, right? Um, you're having those conversations with them. You're talking about what's right, what's wrong, and just primarily the goal is set right values in them so that when they become independent thinkers, probably more intelligent than you, then you still baseline them with enough grounding, enough values that they can make independent decisions, which will head in the right direction, right? I feel, I mean, this is at least my feeling. This is how I feel AI will evolve and alignment would work as well. That as we build it, we got to make sure that we're giving them the right principles, first principles we call, right? Core values. There's a lot of talk about constitutional AI, right? That you're setting the framework, the principle for AI to think what's right, what's wrong, and letting it grow and kind of learn from its own experience. But at some point of time, this is going to be 10x, 100x more intelligent than any person can ever be, or collectively all individuals can be. And how do you make sure it's aligned with human values? And again, there's a ton of debate of whose values are we talking about, because I don't think as humans we have consensus over which value is right or wrong, right? You talk to two very diverse groups, they can have totally different values. So again, those are interesting societal issues to tackle, and again, AI researchers have that as a huge challenge in front of them.
Right, I agree. Well, I think AI researchers and then society in general, right? Like, it's like, do we really want to kind of, at this point, it's like, do we need all these technologies? Like, what are the consequences of these technologies? Uh, you know, there's that aspect also. But I like that you mentioned that, like when you have kids that grow, get smarter than you, like you ground them with principles, So wherever they go, they have those fundamental groundings of, being a good human, being respectful, empathetic, right? And again, people don't have consensus in terms of what the right principles are. So from an AI governance framework, you know, we know that now it's kind of the Wild West. I know the U.S., the EU's passed their bill, their acts as well, the executive order in the U.S. Now we're innovating at such a pace that it's just insanely hard to keep up with what constantly keeps emerging on a day-to-day basis. Uh, how do you think that government should intervene, but also make sure that they're not stifling innovation?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, but I think regulation is the path to to take, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of AI labs are working in a direction where they want to build aligned systems, because again, I don't think anybody's goal is to build a non-aligned system and stuff like that, right? But there will always be fringe elements who'll take some open source thing and do something with it, right? uh, Regulation is the way to go. Like we've done regulation in the past around nuclear, around tobacco, and other things, right? So there's definitely a collective way of thinking about it, right? How we collectively think how these systems should behave, or things they should do and not do. Okay, even like it's such a hard problem. Like there are, if you look at government regulations, there are so many geopolitical kind of challenges we run into, right? I don't think there is a lot of agreement between governments on what is right. I mean, your vantage point is your vantage point and somebody else's is another. So agreeing on things like that is hard, right? That's why, again, AI alignment is a very tough problem. Again, even going back to raising a child, you always want to raise a better person than yourself, right? So while you are aligning them with your own goals, your own ethos, your own values, uh, the hope is always that they become a better version of you, right? They start where you are, but then they grow from their own experiences, learn new things. Along the way, you kind of teach them, you offer books, you offer kind of advice and other things along the way to make them better person than you. I still feel that, for me, that's a fundamental way of how I think about these things. I always, again, whenever somebody asks an AI question, I'm trying to figure out how do humans solve this problem, right? How do we solve it in the human world, right? And then take learnings from there and kind of bring it to this digital world and try to solve it there.
Right. So I got two more questions for you. Right. So we've spoken so much about AI. It seems like everyone with the last year has become an expert in AI. How does one keep up with all of this information? So the question is, I guess, how do you keep evolving and learning and keeping up with all the advancements in this field?
Yeah, that has been super interesting. I would say at times exhausting and a lot of sleepless nights as well. For me personally, right? I felt that this year I have read much more than any year in past. Like maybe in school, right? I was reading that much, but I've spent a lot of time reading myself. Identifying sources of information that are reliable and insightful, right? I mean, a lot of times you hear other people talk or other things, and um, it stimulates your own thinking. It creates ideas, right? I mean, so that has been my thinking. I read a lot of papers myself, like actively. My goal is 2-3 papers every week, right? To stay up to date. Anytime I get any downtime, I listen to podcasts or YouTube videos of like, other people talking about these topics, thinking about difficult problems. Um, Again, constant learning is the way to kind of stay up to date, I guess.
Right. Could you mention some of the podcasts you listen to or the YouTube channels that you follow?
There is Eye on AI. It's a podcast that I listen to regularly. Lex Friedman
Right.
podcast is another one that I listen to a lot. On the YouTube side, Wes Roth has a good channel around AI
Right.
topics. AI Explained is another one that I follow a lot. And they're just actively looking for new papers that get dropped in and stay in touch with those. So.
Awesome. Uh, these are all great podcasts. I know all of them. Uh, so okay, yeah. How can people know about you? So you're part of the AI show. So for people who are developing within the Azure ecosystem, you've got some good videos through Microsoft's channel. Explaining like all the concepts, how to chat with enterprise data and stuff like that. What are other ways? I know your LinkedIn's also quite good. You share quite a lot of interesting articles. And I've got like so I always use you like as a trusted source to kind of filter out it. But what are how can people get in touch with you and maybe talk about the AI show as well? Like,
Yeah, I mean, AI shows run by Seth in
right,
the Azure AI platform team. He's super interesting, resourceful person. He kind of puts out these shows on Monday. So I've been guest in a couple of those. So that has been very, very interesting for me personally. It is the story, right, that we are all trying to tell, how to leverage this new emergent capabilities to do your work better. And again, all those conversations have been interesting. For me personally, I feel best way is LinkedIn is the right place for me to. I mean, I'm not a Twitter person. I try to tweet here and there stuff that I write, but again, it's just an overwhelming space for me. LinkedIn is my happy place because again, I'm able to connect with a lot of like-minded people, a lot of content that I like, and that is where I engage the most. I would say externally.
awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Ashish. Like, it was fun. I enjoyed talking to you. And yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for watching another episode. Awesome.